We're on alert in the days preceding the election and all day long for any possible intimidation at the polls, any possible violence.
George, and we actually saw some intimidation in play today. The FBI is investigating the fact that robocalls went out to voters in about 6 states, to include Ohio and Michigan. In those calls, they told voters, stay at home and be safe, basically telling them not to go to the polls. So the FBI is investigating, and we know that's what they're concerned about tonight and in the days coming. If there's not a quick result known, if we don't know who the president is for a couple days, they expect and anticipate that we will see foreign nations and others try to stoke disinformation and chaos and undermine the democracy.
But to be clear, the process pretty orderly today, Pierre.
The process was orderly, and a lot of law enforcement officials I spoke to today were very thankful. They did not see any sort of violence. It seemed like people were able to vote easily and without any problems. Again, that is the concern going forward, just disinformation
Mr.
about
Reynolds,
whatever the results
how are you tonight?
Let's bring in our chief legal analyst,
What's going on, man?
Dan Abrams, just walk
feeling
through
good,
people,
man. It's
what would
election
constitute
day.
illegal voter
It
intimidation
is.
at the
Getting
polls.
tight, man.
Under federal law,
Getting tight.
would involve
It
coercion.
is, man. Well, look, I'm happy we're doing a special election day coverage. We started live 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm sorry, 9 Eastern, 8 Central Standard Time.
A weapon and threatening someone.
Purposes primarily of getting in right in the nitty-gritty, right around that time where
not really supposed to
things
interact
can
with voters,
get a bit
asking
interesting.
questions
So it'd be nice to
about
hear your
their
thoughts.
eligibility, stating
Where
false
should we
things
begin?
about voting, etc. Those are
So
all
I'm going to begin
to be
with,
levels
I
of
came with a
voter
prediction about
intimidation,
12
but I do
hours
think it
ago,
is
give or
important to
take,
point out
that
that
Biden
this
wins in a
has been
landslide. And I think
pretty calm
a
day.
landslide victory
We
either
were all
way
talking about
is the only
all
way
of
we get
these,
an official announcement
these apocalyptic
tonight.
potential
And
that could occur today.
things are coming in now. I would encourage
we should
people
be able to take
that
at
are watching
least
the
a deep
stream
breath to be able to say,
not
okay,
to get
that's good.
too excited
now
or
let's go into
kind of ride the
phase
wave.
two
You know what I'm
here
saying?
to
Because
see how the
who
counting
knows what
goes,
happens tonight?
what
Even
the
though I'm
results
predicting
are,
a landslide, who knows?
There has not
what
been
happens.
massive.
Well, excitement's a relative term,
voter
right? Because
intimidation. I'm sure we're going to continue to hear more.
depending on where you stand, where you land, how you're feeling, where your heart is, etc.
Kate Shaw, biggest issue
will
with
dictate
counting the
where your
ballots going
excitement lies. I'll tell you,
Well,
you
there's a big question
picked
about what ballots will
a
be
landslide.
counted at all.
So
We're not going to
who
know,
did you pick a
how a
landslide?
lot of absentee voters voted tonight.
Joe Biden,
because
for
states
sure.
like Pennsylvania don't even
And
allow
I'm not just
ballots to
saying
be
that just because of
opened
my
and counted until
what I
the
decided
beginning on
to
election day.
what my
And
preference
you have
was
millions of
in this
ballots.
election.
Now,
I
of
think
course, this election
it
is
had
being
more to
conducted
do
in the
with
midst
just
of
thinking
a
about
pandemic involving a
what
highly
it looked like
contagious
from
virus.
like
And
just
election
a
officials have
common
all
sense
kinds of
standpoint.
changes in order to
I know
facilitate
that
voting in a safe way, including expanding access
a
to
lot of
absentee voting.
the
So we
polls
just
were
have
wrong in
millions
2016,
more
and now we're here in
absentee ballots this
2020.
cycle, than
And
we
it's like
typically
people like
do.
don't
And
trust
there
the
will be
polls.
questions about,
But I mean,
you know,
I think it would be
whether
foolish for us to
signatures
assume
match, whether
that
ballots that
the
arrive
polls,
after election
people
day in
that are
states
running
like
these polls
Pennsylvania. Right
didn't
now,
adjust their
those
settings. I
are
mean, when you're
legitimate
that
valid
wrong,
ballots under Pennsylvania law.
you kind of got to
But
go
we
back
can
and
see the Trump
reevaluate
campaign,
your
if it all
process.
comes
So I
down to
think
Pennsylvania,
the
go
pollsters
back
have
to the
yes
Supreme
done a
Court to
little
reopen that
bit
question.
more due
Polls are
diligence
still
in the way
open
they
in most of
conduct
the country.
their
Kate, thank you.
research.
When we come back, we're gonna hear
In
from the Biden
addition,
campaign.
another thing that kind of really sticks out to me is I read this morning that we had 100 million people go out early to vote, and I think I told you that number was 75% of all complete total voter turnout in 2016, and I believe that a lot of more turnout is good for a left-wing candidate in this, because I think when it comes to Donald Trump and his core base, he can count on those people to always go out and ride hard for him, or else he wouldn't be able to say the things that he says or do the things that he does with no real repercussions. I think, on the other side, there's a lot of variables that go into attracting voters. You got to be able to appeal to those different voters that are otherwise undecided. And if you track them election to election, they vary one way or the other. They're not always Democrat, they're not always Republican. So more voter turnout, in my opinion, sounds like it could be a good thing for Biden. But again, there's so many different variables that we've talked about that can change anything that you may have thought to be the norm.
Wednesday night, get ready for.
So here we stand, and to give context to the viewers who are listening to the podcast, and then those who are watching us live stream, first time ever on YouTube, live streaming. We are at 8:05 Central Standard Time, 9:05 Eastern, 6 o'clock on the West Coast. There have been 73 electoral votes called for Joe Biden, 48 for Trump. It's like Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. How's that for looking at a map and knowing my U.S. states? Have called to decide for Trump. And then several of the traditional northeastern states have been called on the side of Joe Biden. It's like New Hampshire. It appears Vermont, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, I believe, up to this point. So 73 to 48. I find it remarkable that sort of things are playing out the way they are. So Florida was going back and forth, roller coaster as it always is, and now it appears to be going on the side of Donald Trump. North Carolina, which was a swing state, toss-up, looks like it may be going towards the direction of Joe Biden, but still early. I think they got 75% of the electorate in. A lot of that voting may have been from people who did the early vote. Georgia was one. I want to talk about Georgia with you. Georgia was one that was predicted to possibly be a swing state. I think last time we checked, 57%. I'm looking at it now, 980,000 votes for Trump, about 700,000 for Biden as of right now.
Wow.
Looks like Jordan, so Georgia, 58% for Trump. Looks like Georgia's going to may stay categorically where people thought it would be. So maybe people turned out. What are your thoughts, though? I guess one on a typical, or a traditional Republican state like that having the possibility of any sort of change in the dynamic and being even considered a toss-up state. And two, what do you think it says of the fact that maybe things aren't as they appear to be? Does that, are we in for a long night? Are we in for a lot of upsets, or is that just sort of maybe the turnout wasn't what it was? What are your immediate thoughts on it without drawing any major decisions on how it's going to turn out?
I think it's definitely going to be the roller coaster that I mentioned. And the expectations, like I thought that, I thought Florida's going to be close. I think Biden will get it. So I think if Florida does turn out to be a red state, I think that would be surprising to me. But out of all the things you said, to be honest with you, the biggest surprise for me right now is the way Texas is looking.
What we're seeing across the country tonight is that
when you're projecting, red states, right? You're thinking about what states are going to be the states that you could just kind of list them as a shoo-in, like the California or the New York for the Democrats. You think of Texas is like the bedrock of Republican states, and now Joe Biden is leading currently with, I just saw 65% of the votes in. That is a head scratcher to me, and I'm really, I really don't even have an explanation for why that could be the case, why Texas all of a sudden is up in the air, and it's not a guaranteed Republican state. I'm sure, I know we talked about this off air, so you may have a little bit of an answer or a thought process to this, but I don't know, man. I'm trying to put it together in my head. It doesn't make much sense to me.
So I've been talking to my friends in Houston. I have a good friend of mine who is a news anchor in Houston. I think I talked about her on the podcast previously. I've mentioned to her. I mentioned her to you. And I've got a good buddy of mine I went to UNC with that's in Houston. And I've got a good buddy I went to UT with this. I've talked to a lot of people. All three different. One had never voted. One traditionally voted conservatively. The other was a previous conservative who had been changed in 2016 to become what would be considered non-conservative independent because of the she was so turned off as a news anchor by sort of Donald Trump. All of them in conversation said that there's a momentum shift in Texas for a couple of reasons. One, Dallas is becoming more it's already a populated place, but it's becoming sort of more educated, and young people are moving there. You've got the DACA individuals, and you've got a consensus of individuals that feel alienated, I think, maybe by some of the policies that, sort of became highlighted, as it relates to, building a wall, or some of the unrest and uneasiness in various cities in Texas. You've got sort of a growing diversity there as well. And I think you've got, candidly, you've got a large state like that, and candidly, a large sort of group of individuals who traditionally have never felt that they were in play. So you get all that and you aggregate it up in the big cities, and you tell them all, hey, if you all come out and vote, we really dictate what maybe the state looks like in an election. I think all that's aggregated into putting Texas into play. I wouldn't be surprised going forward, I'll say this now, if Texas becomes a state like Florida, always in contention. What's interesting is I told my friend, I'm on record for this, and I'm not on record, unfortunately, on our show for having done this, since we took a pre-election hold off to get ready for this, but I told my friends, I said, I wouldn't be surprised if somehow we didn't protect the Dems didn't protect the blue wall, and that Texas was the one that ended up deciding on election night. Because if you win California and Texas and New York, you've essentially, if you hold any level of traditional faith, you've won the election. On either side. Right? So, I think that's part of the reason, but I bring that up to ask you, Keenan, because we were talking about this earlier. You've got the mass amount of population living in these three particular states. And love it or hate it, the Electoral College has put us in positions, and many times in our lifetimes, that has not resulted in the person with the popular vote winning the actual election. It happened in 2016. I know it happened in 2000. And it may have happened in the interim. I know those, because I remember specifically sort of what occurred in those elections. What are your thoughts about the Electoral College? Do you think it's something that, actually sort of, is relevant anymore? Should it still exist? There's a whole number of reasons why it was even started in the first place, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Man, I was listening to something, I think it was another podcast today, and they were talking about the Electoral College, and one of the things that was said was it was instituted with the idea of protecting the states with smaller populations, for them having like somewhat of an equal voice. And as a matter of fact, I know where it was at. I was on the guy was on CNBC, and he was just kind of saying that now those states that traditionally that the Electoral College is supposed to protect, like Idaho, Wyoming, they're always red. Like there's literally no campaigning, like meaningful campaigning done there like there is in like Ohio or Michigan or Florida. So I don't think it's right, period, if a candidate has the majority vote, for them not to be the leader of our country, because in that case, it just kind of, to me, it defeats the whole purpose of the democracy. Democracy is for the people that have to say, people that have a voice. But then when people see like things like that happening, when they see the popular candidate losing, it makes them feel like that kind of institutes another idea of my vote doesn't matter. We went out, we did everything, we campaigned, we won the popular, we got all the people to vote for, we got all the people to vote for Biden if this happens again. But he's not the president, but she's not the president. So what's the point of even going out anymore? Like, I think that idea could be spawned from seeing something like that happen. But that the Electoral College is synonymous, like, with the founding fathers, with the Constitution. Like, it is fabric that our country is built on. So do I see it being changed? I've heard some rumblings of there potentially being some legislation proposed. I don't know if it would ever go through, but I just don't think it's right, and I definitely think it leads to a lack of voter confidence if it happens. more than once. Honestly, it shouldn't
Let's
happen.
dive into it because it's happened, right? Let's dive into it a little bit. So let's give our listeners and listeners, viewers, by way of background, sort of the history of electoral college is like you said, it's to protect those states that are not as populated, which is sort of understanding to a degree, right? But it's also to make sure those states are not overlooked when we're trying to keep and maintain a more perfect union, right? We want to keep states that appear to be irrelevant. We want to drive commerce. We want to do those things that make a good United States, right? But what's so interesting is, and this is sort of the dichotomy of the election, is so interesting is you hear one candidate saying, I'm running not to be the president of the red states or the blue states, I'm running to be a president of the United States. And you hear another candidate sometimes who, for whatever reason, sort of seems to intentionally separate the states, right? Seems to intentionally sort of do so in a manner saying like, democratically run states or republicly run states, and drawing a distinction as a result of maybe trying to build a populace or a consensus of support. So recognizes maybe some of the value there in that, but in the same vein, you've got the majority of people living in maybe some of those states that he's being most critical of. So it builds towards what? It builds towards a misunderstanding of the United States. It builds towards a separation of states. It builds towards anxiety of whether or not your voice is actually heard, whether your vote actually matters. We have a legislative and an executive branch that has been a part of the fabric of America for the exact reason that, hey, we want to keep the Oval Office, the executive office, separate from the legislative office. We want the people to put in the legislature. So the contrary argument to your end would say, hey, well, the legislature is built up based on population density, etc. So that's why we have a system of checks and balances. Well, we do, but in the same vein, it creates a bit of a strife sometimes as well, because what you end up with is an agenda that doesn't really necessarily always maybe have the support of the most. So I just think it's fascinating as well. I would like to see it overturned myself. And or maybe a systematic restructuring of it in some respect. But I would be urged to hear what our listeners have to say when the opportunity presents them to have a dialogue on it.
Let me ask you this. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but you just had me thinking, like, so let's say that they do get some legislation passed, and let's say that they get rid of the electoral college. Do you think there are any, like, if you're a critic of somebody that, like, so somebody was criticizing your point of view, what do you think their main criticism would be of relying on a presidential race that was solely determined by the popular vote?
That's a good question, because we can always draw like sort of wild scenarios. But how wild of a scenario would it be? That's a great question. If you said to somebody, man, I can't believe the person who got the most votes won the election.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it's like, I didn't mean it in that. I meant it like, okay, somebody was like, well, the electoral college is for a reason. Like, if they were trying to make the argument against or for keeping the electoral college, like, how could you frame that argument when somebody counters, again, kind of getting to your point, counters with the person who is the president had the most votes? Like, out of all the people in America, more people voted for him than they did the other guy. So, like, I guess my question is, like, if we, what is like the barrier? Like, there's obviously got to be some friction in trying to get something like that passed. So what's the, like, what is that friction? Like, what is the opposite view on that point?
Then I was being sarcastic. That's kind of what I meant too, right? Like, on the contrary, if you try to bring in that sort of that odd. scenario where somebody would say, "Man, I can't believe the guy who won popular vote won the election," right? Like only in America, right? Because in our states, the popular vote wins the day. The popular vote wins in the individual states.
That's what
So it's not.
I was literally just thinking that. I was like, when you go to vote for a state representative, there's no like electoral college that puts in these votes for this state representative. It's whoever has the most votes. You know, when you're voting for mayor, you're voting for the governor. So, you know, I don't see why it couldn't work on a national scale.
So something interesting that I was thinking about, and we have our production crew, you know, secretly in the background, passing notes and sending out information. Did you know that Abraham Lincoln only won 39% of the popular vote, and that he won due to the Electoral College?
That I did not know. Well, in that scenario, thank God we had the electoral college, because the man abolished slavery.
Well, yeah, right. Maybe thank God, maybe not. I mean, but so there's that's an important aspect, right? But again though, you have to think, and I don't know, I don't have the fact sheet in front of me, and kudos to our production guy in the background, Cameron, for sliding in that information. But I wonder if at that time it was a result of the fact that we were trying to develop a more perfect union. We were, you know, if you think about it, we were saying, all right, the popular, and again, speculating, you know, the population density may have been in, say, states where maybe there was more slavery, or there was more indentured servitude, and people didn't have a right to vote. And they said, well, these larger areas, you know, we're going to allow, maybe people were running away to go vote there. I mean, I don't know. There's any confluence of circumstances that could have occurred.
Right.
But you got to think times where we didn't have such a large ability to share information at a global national scale, that it would be important to have an electoral college. Maybe that's the underpinnings of it, or part of the underpinnings of it, of let's have an electoral college so that we don't give a state too much power simply because they're not doing the things they should be doing.
Yeah.
Right? We haven't changed the electoral college. I mean, we haven't changed the number of votes, right? Like we have the ability to, and it doesn't happen often. We have the ability to change the number of members of the House of Representatives who carries more in certain districts, etc. But we don't change the electoral college, to my knowledge. We don't change the number of electoral votes each year. And again, I think it would have to be a massive population change in order for us to do so. With that understanding, but knowing that the culture, that the dynamic, that the sort of density, the value of a state's input has changed, why either allow for a state to continue to have some level of power, you know, one way or the other, when their population might be changing, and or in the alternative, why continue to take power away from those states that are, you know, bringing people in, that are helping the economy? It's not like the people are moving to Kansas and becoming a bad person.
Yeah.
I might not want to go to Kansas because I might be worried that I'm in the population center of people that just fundamentally breathe and think differently because they're not used to me coming there, because I don't think that they're there. So it seems like to me it's counterintuitive to developing a United States. So I think I agree with you. I would always be an advocate of allowing the person who wins the popular vote to be the president, whether that's a Democrat or Republican, Independent, or whoever. I mean, one of the things I think that this election and the election of Donald Trump, if anything, has taught us is that if you can build up a groundswell of support and momentum, and you do it effectively, you can win and become president of the United States. Anything can happen. So imagine if we had a popular vote. I mean this in all sincerity. Imagine if we had a popular vote and, say, Wayne Johnson ran for president of the United States. Not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but as the people's champion. I say that's funny because that's his nickname in WWE, but the man, he has an ability to sort of sway people to think a different way, and he seems like he could be a good leader. Just imagine though, how much fun would that be to not have to be stuck in a circumstance where you have to be tied to an ideology that maybe you don't agree with.
David Muir, what do we
Maybe
see
that
here
you
in
have
polls in Florida?
an ideology that allows you to be both Republican and Democrat.
Yeah. I think about that often. I think about why, why is it only red or blue? Like, why are we like so? Why can't there be like a green? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't get it. And I think that if you have somebody like The Rock run for president and that has like a mesh of policies, I think that would probably be the most interesting and such a broad scope presidential term, because I mean, if you don't have any loyalties to party lines, I think there's things that people on either side of the aisle would want to do, but for fear of upsetting their donors and constituents, and for fear of not being reelected, they won't go about doing those things, whether or not they are the right thing. And then conversely, if they aren't the right thing, if they're just done for selfish, I want to stay in my seat, or I accept a certain type of behavior because I don't want to lose re-election. Like, I feel like if you have somebody that has no affiliation to left or right, they have the freedom to swim and do whatever they want to do, as long as it's in the best interest of the totality of the people.
Yeah, and that's and people, and so people will say to you, they'll say, well, that's sort of what we have when we have a legislative branch. And playing, devil's advocate, people will say, and you could say, yeah, you're right, but
I disagree.
that same, well, and good, and I would, but we can disagree, but I would also say on that side of disagreement that same person who maybe moves from, let's say, Ohio to Georgia, and moves and embraces a city or county municipality in that state of Georgia. Everyone in the community loves him or her. They have no choice but to change some of their ideology or platform to conform to what is conceived to be the populace, even though their platform might help those populace more if those people opened up and sort of had to go through a fundamental understanding of really, hey, what are the policies that I promote that really get to you, not hearing talking points. If that would happen, man, can you imagine how much more collegial we would be as a country?
And this is something that
Yeah.
may play out in Arizona as well.
Because if you think about it, and I wonder when people think about this,
older people, no
you know,
other group has been more impacted
we
by
treat
coronavirus than
politics
senior
almost like it's
citizens who are 65 and older. In particular, 82% of the deaths
UGA
in Florida
playing Ohio
have been
State.
senior
Yeah.
citizens. And these are people who
it's
come
not.
out to vote during the
Right?
midterms.
Or is it? I don't know.
1/3 of those who showed up
I mean,
to vote
it is
were
now,
senior
but
citizens. And this is,
it,
also far
but it's
reaching.
not.
This is
It's
not
not.
just
I don't
people who are
think.
seeing
I don't think
firsthand
it should
their
be.
friends dying, but
I
they're
don't think it should
experiencing
be
the
as tribal.
isolation. And
But I just
across
feel
the
like
country,
it's
you
in our
have that
psychology as
11%
humans to
death
kind of
toll
revert to
with the
that
elderly
behavior,
population. In
to be in
Florida,
a tribe.
in
Like we
2016,
long for
President Trump
inclusion.
won
We
by
long for people to
113,000 votes.
be
He won
around people that
senior
look like
citizens.
us,
He beat
that
Hillary
think like
Clinton
us,
by
that we gravitate toward that. So
330,000 votes
from a
with the
psychological
seniors. And so this
standpoint,
is
it makes
looming
sense
large,
that
and we're seeing a major
we
shift as far as the support
kind of
from seniors
get to
going
that type of
Biden.
model. But I mean,
Well, I think what's very,
if you again having like a more of a populist message that blurs those lines. Not saying it hasn't been done in the past, but I'm speaking more so to like legislative purposes. Like I feel like there are certain things that people vote for and against just simply on the party line, not if it's the right thing to do or not. You know what I'm saying? And I just can't understand that. I mean, that's just selfishness and greed to me, because you want to keep your seat, you want to keep your position of power. I'm not surprised, but that's what I think it is.
But it's a light vote. It's
So
a big vote. It's going to
we
be
should
strong.
transition a bit. I think that's an unfortunate reality of tribal mentality of sort of way greed dictates, and sort of, or just power dictates sort of how we think and how we go about. And not to say that anybody should necessarily think powerlessly, but I mean, more so, I think it's important to. Oh, and there's a big update in Florida, by the way, and so we'll touch on that here in a second.
Yo, are you watching ABC or you like? Because I'm watching ABC and I'm not. You must have some CNN rolling up because I'm confused.
Well, I don't know. I thought I saw a different number here on we're watching the same thing. I've got multitude. I've got Fox, I've got ABC, I've got CNN, I've got NBC on, to give a shout out to all the channels, CBS. It looks like what I just saw. Sorry to digress. We're live here, so let's do it. So let's look. So where we are right now, it looks like they've based on what I'm seeing in Florida. So North Carolina is 50 to 48 Biden right now. 2,385,000, 2,300,000. Difference of about 86,000 votes. Ohio, Biden, 50 to 48, 1,912,000 to 1,810,000. So that's about 102,000 votes. Pennsylvania, Biden, 60 to 38. Now it's only with 12% in because they're going slower there because they couldn't start counting us till late 511 to 327. Virginia, though, at 40% in is a bit of a surprise with Trump at
Yeah,
7
he's doing his thing in Virginia.
Okay, so what I saw must have been flipped. 93% in, you're right. Trump 5,552,000, Biden 5,223,000, so 51,48. So it looks like that's going to go Trump with about 93% report. So I don't know. Well, it would be interesting to see if Florida matters.
I think Biden takes Ohio.
Yeah.
Right now, Texas is gridlocked at 49.3 with 73% in. Oh man, if he loses Texas, man, he might as well pack. My prediction, I think, will most certainly come true.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, and I know it's easier said than done. I predicted Joe Biden win in Texas. I really did. People gonna call it crazy, but I truly said that at the outset. That I thought that would be the shock that actually put it over. But what's interesting is it looks like Virginia is going to flip. Oh wait, no, it's
flip.
Yeah, it looks like it may. Virginia's traditionally been well, it's only 40% voting, so let's not put the cart before the horse. But it looks like Virginia.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Virginia flipped. I mean, just looking at the numbers right now, I think it's going to stay. It's going to go red this year.
Well, they got 40% in, and we can't hear this because you and I are talking, but it looks like 58% to 40%, or 40% polling at this point. So my goodness, it would be interesting to see that. Now that's a scenario that a lot of people did not envision. If he wins Virginia, so let's do the math. I think he would still be very difficult because if you give Trump Virginia, take that away from Biden, but then you give Biden North Carolina and Ohio, then that blue wall becomes tremendously important. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of unexpectancy of what we thought might exist.
Georgia is looking pretty crazy right now. 57-42 for Trump.
Yeah, the gap is growing there. I think
take a look at Florida,
we'll see. I wonder what percentage of that has pulled in at this point.
I think it's at like 40% maybe.
In this, what's fascinating is Joe Biden is on average
early still. North Carolina's at 80% polling in. Joe Biden's ahead by 86,000 votes. 80% polling in, and a lot of what appears to not have polled in yet is the areas, the surrounding counties around Raleigh, Durham, and the Research Triangle. If that is the case, with 80% polling in and those counties surrounding the Research Triangle, or inside the Research Triangle, I would suspect that those are going to probably lean, based on having gone to the University of North Carolina, that those are probably going to lean more Democratic in support of Joe Biden. I'm speculating on that front, but we shall see.
by
We
that
shall see.
Miami-Dade
So,
number. Joe Biden
but exciting
sits in
stuff
Florida
that we
with
are
that
able to talk through.
Miami-Dade
So
number,
let's
but instead of
transition a little bit.
or even something that you could bank
Keenan,
on, it's going
what
to be
happens?
a very, very close race in Florida now.
And this is
Okay,
sort of
Matt,
people
thanks,
quarterbacking their
Heidi
life.
Heitkamp, former Democratic Senator
What do
from
we
North
think
Dakota.
happens
We're
over the
seeing
course of the
COVID
next
rage
coming
in your state,
days,
across
weeks,
the upper
months
Midwest, as Joe Biden and
in
Donald Trump battling it out in
the
Wisconsin, Minnesota,
stock
Pennsylvania,
market and
and Michigan?
finance and market and retail and things of that nature? What do you think? You think that there's going to be a severe impact on an immediate basis the next month to 2 months to 3 months, regardless of who wins or in furtherance of someone winning? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to preface this with this is not investment advice. This is strictly my opinion. And I have to kind of put that out there. But I mean, I think it's going to depend on just if there's certainty. I don't think it matters red or blue. I just think it matters that there is like stability. Like, okay, we know for a fact that we have a president. Like there's not gonna be a runoff. There's not gonna be a Supreme Court decision. I think the market will favor
we will keep an eye on it all. Heidi Heitkamp, thanks very much. We do have
like some certainty, and then from there, things will go as they should. And I think depending on what happens in the legislative branch could also have an effect, because as we know, the big thing that's been like on the cusp has been stimulus. Like that's been the conversation. So I think depending on how the outcome of the legislative branch comes out, depending on certainty versus uncertain results and conflicting results, I think that's going to play a part in it. But ultimately, I think there's just a lot of forces at play that will keep the market going up, in my opinion. And I'm speaking specifically to what the Fed is doing to try to keep the market stable. I think that's helping the market. And then you add in the certainty of the presidency, I think it will be, a pretty stable outlook.
Okay. So are you saying you think that the market dislikes uncertainty?
I think yes, right now. Right now. I think the uncertainty will cause there to be volatility. Like the uncertainty, if there is a situation where we don't know who the president is by, say, the end of the week, or there's like contested results or whatever, and it gets to like a Gore Bush situation, I think at that point we will see some volatility. Do I think it's gonna do what it did a few weeks ago? I don't know. I mean, honestly, it's truly a gamble. You really have no idea what's gonna happen on a day-to-day basis. But I just would expect more volatility in the event of uncertainty. If there is a clear-cut winner, I think it's business as usual.
I tend to agree, and I'm glad to ask you that, because this is what we want our viewers to be able to take away, is to sort of have an understanding of investments and stocks and portfolios and things that are affected in our world based on this. Well, I know we've been into our users, when Keenan and I decided to do this podcast, and more so Keenan decided to do this podcast, and I decided to he decided to allow me to join him. A part of the crux of it is to want to get out there and actually talk about stuff and how it affects us practically, how it affects Gen Z and Generation X practically, and millennials practically. So, I agree to a degree. I'm looking at the Dow futures right now, and for those of you who don't know what that means, it's just an indicator of where people predict that the market may or may not open starting tomorrow. And it looks like the Dow futures are down by about 130 points. S&P futures are down by about 7 points, so not significant drops. I would suffice to say that based on the way these projections are looking right now, Joe Biden at 62% right now, looking like he may carry Ohio, he may and likely will carry North Carolina. That if that is the case, which would almost then, so long as there's not something dire to change, almost then indicate a win with some level of certainty, regardless of we know what Pennsylvania and Michigan are. Unless, again, there's some type of change, unless Virginia and other states that we don't anticipate having an effect. I think that you're right. I think that we see the Dow futures go up, and I think that the market will say, all right, there's stability there, but there's also the likelihood potentially of a stimulus package that has not been able to get done. But what's interesting too, and I agree with you, Keenan, that it doesn't matter, is that on the flip side, if Trump wins, he said he wanted to wait until after the election to pass a stimulus. So he's probably going to pass one too. It's just the stability and the certainty of it, I think, is where we'll end up. So what do you think? All right, so we've talked a little bit about the market. What you know, this is something I wanted to talk to you about. We talked about the possibility of hosting a conversation on it. What about, you think, the real estate market? Do you think that it continues on a trajectory that it's been on? Or
I mean, you could just go look at the fact that and again, I'll preface this with, this is just opinion, not investment advice. You can just look at the interest rates, like they're at historic lows. Curve is almost flat. And in addition to that, the 30-year mortgage rate is like somewhere like 2.2%. So I think that has lit a fire on the buying of property. But I'm curious. I think it still goes up, but I'm very cautious because, I mean, I think at some point we got to have a conversation about the rent and mortgage moratorium that some places have in effect. And once that's lifted in 2021, I think you got to think about what happens to all that acquired, like accumulated debt. Like somebody's got to pay it off. You know, and there has only been one stimulus. So maybe these people that were in desperate need of this moratorium don't have the extra, you know, help that they would have had there had been a second stimulus package. But I mean, I think at the same time, you would hope that in between the end of the stimulus and the rent moratorium, that they have somehow, if they were unemployed, that they have found a source of employment, especially when you look at, you know, jobless claims on a weekly basis have been decreasing. So I think there's a few variables that kind of constitute my decision making. But at the end of the day, I think it's in the short term at least, it's going to keep going up. And then if you also throw in some uncertainty in the election, like one thing that's certain in this world is land. And at the end of the day, that is the true measure of a person's wealth, in my opinion, is how much land do you own. And so in a scenario in which there is volatility because nobody knows what's happening, I think land is like one area where you know what it is. Like it's a necessary part of daily life. So I think all of those things kind of coming together. I mean, I see people continuing to buy houses for sure in the near future.
Why don't you explain to the viewers what that, for those who don't know, I think most do, but the rent and mortgage moratorium in a brief way as to what that is.
So I'm gonna say that I'm not like extremely well versed, and you probably would be able to really tap into that a little more with your current business holdings. But I think the best way to describe it would be that although you don't have to pay your rent, the payments still rack up. It's not a break in the payment. The debt just is still there. You still got to pay off. The person that you're renting from still has to pay off that amount in their mortgage, in which case you will still have to, I don't know. It could be, we're going to make you charge, we're going to increase rent. It could be you just have a longer lease term. I don't know. I honestly have no idea how that works. But I do know that somebody got to pay that debt. It just don't disappear.
Yeah, well, and I always found on it, yes, I mean, that's right, that basically the federal government and or some states through legislation have said that because of the pandemic, coronavirus, that they would allow for owners to have, with providing the right information to their mortgage lenders, the ability to basically have a mortgage moratorium where they didn't have to pay their mortgages, and that it would not, debt collectors or mortgage banks could not basically, put that on their credit reports and treat them negatively. They had to give them time. And then at the end of that time period, then they either had to refinance and change or add on to the existing term or whatever the case may be. And then in the same, as going down the ladder, from the renter's standpoint, the renters could have sort of rent moratoriums where landlords could not kick tenants out, essentially. I believe one of them did expire. The federal one may have expired in beginning of October. Notwithstanding, people having to provide very detailed reasons as to why they couldn't pay it if they couldn't pay their rent. But I think the real estate market is going to continue to be there. But I also think that should we have a continued spike, I have fears that we could revisit something like 2008, where you have a credit crisis, and you have overwhelming amounts of debt that are accumulating, and then banks leveraged with that debt or having sold off that debt, and then that debt not being able to be paid, and then loans basically defaulting at the same time. Fearful of that, and I hope that if we do pass a stimulus, that we acknowledge it, and that we do something to avoid it. But otherwise, I think real estate is on the up and up. I think we'll see. What were you going to say?
I hesitate to make a too quick of a comparison. 08. There are a few reasons. I will say this: during my pandemic boredom, I have spent a ton of time watching these 08 documentaries, different shows about and movies about what happened in 2008, and I think that there were a lot of forces at play in that particular situation. I think I don't think we're going to be in the same place in which our financial institutions were over leveraged and betting on bad loans, or underwriting bad loans, and there was predatory lending practices. You got these ninja loans and stuff. I think there was a lot of forces at play that are in play right now for there to be an equivalent downturn. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think a downturn is possible. I just don't think it will look like 08 or be as bad as 08, because that we were on the brink of like some serious shit. And by the power of the $700 billion troubled asset relief program, as they like to call it, we were able to get pulled back from the brink. But I do worry more about individuals. I worry about it being harder to get a house. I worry about people getting put out of their houses. I think that's what my main worry is. And as you said, that having a credit crisis could be a big problem and could make it more difficult for people, to get loans. So I think there's a lot of different things that could go into that, and it's really just too unpredictable to try to make an assumption.
I agree. I hope that we don't go to that point. But I thought it was important to bring it up because there are overwhelming similarities, but not to the depths of what we saw in 2008.
Yeah.
And hopefully our listeners don't really remember or affect it that much. I don't remember it too much from a money standpoint. I didn't have any money at the time, but I do remember those.
Exactly. I was in my parents' house. I was a freshman in high school. I did not care, But when you think about it, I mean, when you got an institution that's underwriting bad loans and they're 30-to-1 leveraged, and then you got to write down, you're underwriting bad bonds, and then the whole bond is worthless, and you got to write that down. You have billions and billions and billions of dollars of that on your balance sheet. So you got to write it down, and you can't meet the margin call. Now you're insolvent. That's really where it came through. Oh, and then with AIG, the situation with that, which almost crashed the entire world, was that they were insuring these bad bonds, and they were taking on all of that and taking on all this risk. And then when it came time to pay the piper, because these bonds started to fail, they didn't have the money. They were insolvent. So, I mean, as you said, it's not to the depth of what was going on. I mean, it was a lot of shit that was happening all at once in the most unprecedented way that really sunk us down. But, I mean, I don't think it'll get much worse. I don't think anything will be as worse as that that mid-March S&P reading. You know, it's always everything has that valley. I don't think anything will get too much worse than that valley.
Man, let's hope we don't revisit that. Let's definitely hope we don't revisit that. Well, let's do it. We're at about 10 to 12 minutes left. Let's look. It looks like the next polls close. We're again, typically we don't state the times. We're not always live like we are. We're looking forward to having this rebroadcast. People can sort of hear what we had to think about the election as it unfolded. But we're 10 minutes until 10 Eastern. And it appears that the numbers are starting to unfold a little bit. Some more key race alerts are being disclosed right now. Let's see. Ohio is up by 13,000 votes with 65%.
Tom, thanks. What are we seeing in the exit polls there, David?
2,008,000 encouraging numbers, but the exit polls reflect something slightly different in Ohio. If you take
North Carolina
job performance
is up by
in Ohio,
65. Biden's up by 65,000 votes, with about 82%.
The strongest number we're seeing in that sort of upper Midwest of the country. And when you break it down to those two central issues, containing COVID, rebuilding the economy, 48% say the pandemic is more important to try to contain. But here's where it gets interesting, George. I was digging a little deeper here. The vast majority of Ohio
20% reporting up by about 22,000.
So handle the pandemic moving forward.
A couple important swing states there.
And that's even with the governor Mike DeWine, who's received such high marks for his
and in Minnesota, he's running. It appears that Joe Biden's running away with it. About 30% reporting. He's up by about 300,000 votes. So the blue wall seems to be coming.
What do you make of the early results?
It's looking good. Even in
Let's,
places like
I just want to ask you, Keenan.
we're seeing Joe Biden
You have,
Hillary Clinton by 10, 20%, which is really great.
You've
because,
expressed
Ohio
your
has got a lot to prove. We made presidents, we made both,
sort of
we made,
frustration,
Obama
but
both
also
times, so I
with
think
your
Ohio
understanding
has a
of
chip
like
on
the
their
political
shoulder. We're
spectrum.
ready to flip back to blue in this one. A lot of hard work
A
going
Navy
on
graduate,
in
someone
Ohio
who has
hopefully to
seen
deliver.
immense opportunity quickly in life at a young point, but also someone who has, I think, a perspective that people are really starting to grow and understand and appreciate.
I'm not pessimistic yet. I think the first votes often come in are the absentees. We've seen Democrats
Regardless
do
of
very
who
well across the country with absentees.
who we wake up tomorrow
I
with
expect
president.
that Ohio will close strong for the president.
Why
In Iowa,
is it important that we
there
have all
seems to be a
voted
lot of
and we've
momentum
taken
for
part in the
Republicans. And what we
democratic
see
process?
across the board here is
That's
that
a great
places we
question,
expect
and
Republicans to win appear to be
to that answer, I would give something that I've seen
really
multiple
North
times
Carolina, Georgia. That's what this is going to come down
on
to
social
tonight.
media,
Okay,
and
thanks
that's
very
just
much. Let's
because
go to Adrian Banker in
people that
Columbus.
came
Adrian,
before
as
us,
David Muir
great
said,
great
COVID
grandparents,
has been
in some
raging through
cases
the state of Ohio
grandparents,
for the last several weeks.
they started
Yes, that's
it
right,
not
George. In
being
fact,
able
new
to vote.
numbers posted today saying that
Then
there
it
were over
became being
4,200 new
harassed,
cases of the
being
virus here in
turned
Ohio.
away, being
33
suppressed,
deaths. That takes the
all
number of
different
total
types of
cases
methods that you can
up to
think
more than
of.
225,000 in this
And when
state.
they
Now,
didn't
that
vote,
is one
it was too
concern
hard.
for
Imagine
voters
living
here
in
Ohio, but
Central
their major
Alabama
concern is the
or
economy,
Western
joblessness,
Alabama
workers, needing
in
employment,
1969
and they,
or in
overall, according to our early
1970,
data, show that they
when
believe
you're
that
trying to go
Trump
vote
can
for a state
handle
election or
this
vote
more than
for,
Biden. But
a
again,
presidential
every
election.
poll is
Imagine
very
having
tight,
the
and this
process
is
and
a
the things that
tough
they have to
state.
go
This
through to try
is
to
showing
vote.
that the results are tied
Imagine
between Trump and Biden.
all the people that fought and died,
This could be a very historic
back in the Civil War for
election.
us
There have only been
to
two
get, for
exceptions
African Americans
where
especially,
Ohio didn't call the presidential
to have the
year.
right to
In fact,
vote.
if you just look
And
back
so I
at
think
history,
too many
whoever
people have
wins
suffered,
Ohio
fought,
lends
been in
itself
jail,
to
been
winning the
abused,
presidency
died
nomination. So
for
we
us
are
to
waiting
all
those
be able
numbers.
to
The polls
go
closed at 7:30, though. Anybody who was in line
to the
still could be seen and
polls
still
and,
could cast
and
their
exercise
ballot.
our
But
rights.
again, those numbers for
And
COVID
even
are
going
a
back
big
from a more
concern,
united
and
front,
a
not
lot
just
people are
people of
looking
color,
at
black people.
joblessness. And
You just
like
look at
you guys are talking
what we
about in
did
studio,
what our
the
founding
ability for
fathers
Ohio
did, the
to
American
flip
Revolution,
between red
the
and
setup
blue
of the
is
Constitution.
certainly something
It is
we
all
will
for
see
us
time and
to
time
exercise
again.
that right.
Republicans do
So
not win the White House if they
all
don't in
people, not just
Ohio.
black people,
Adrian
all
Banker,
people,
thanks very much. Let's go back to Florida.
we're given this right on the backs of other people, on the backs of current military members that are currently in harm's way to preserve our way of life. So I think knowing all of that, regardless of how you feel about the candidates, regardless of how you feel about the process of the way votes are counted, you have to at least just go out and vote. When you put it in perspective of that in that way, of all the people that have sacrificed so that we are here where we are right here today, you have to go out and vote. Like, it's a slap in the face to those people if you don't.
All right. And I think, I agree with the sentiment. And I think fundamentally, you can't go forward without looking back. Somewhat how I would qualify some of what you said. You can't look forward and just recognize that we have a right to vote that should be so fundamental without looking back to what we had to do and what people had to do for this country to have that right. That's looking back and respecting that right and having your voice heard so that this country can be what we hope it to be, which is one nation under God. You know, individual with liberty and justice for all. And as cliche as it sounds, I think at the end of the day, that's what I would hope that everybody would want to see out of the United States of America. So, I'm passing the mic to you, Keenan, but with that, I'm wondering, you know, as we sort of we approach the 10 p.m. Eastern hour, do you want to make any more predictions on any particular states that are in the uncertain column right now? What do you think? What do you
you know, I'm just gonna stick with my overall prediction of Biden in the landslide. I was expecting Georgia to go a different direction. Honestly, I was expecting Florida to go in a different direction. But I mean, it's still early. Still a lot of ballots to be counted. But I'm sticking with the Biden and the landslide hot take. We'll see what happens. I mean, I don't predict I'm gonna stay up till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I probably should, but I gotta go to work in the morning, so I need my sleep. But you know, at the end of the day, regardless of who wins, life will go on. I don't think there's gonna be a civil war. I don't think there's gonna be civil unrest or riot. I mean, there might be a little bit of protesting and looting, but not to the point of where there's this national, civil unrest on a scale that we've never seen. And yeah, like I said, life will go on. You know, people freaked out in 2016, and then the last 4 years happened, and we're here. And so I think that will happen regardless of who wins.
Well, I hope you're right. You know, I think it's a sad state of American commentary, and I know you're not making light of anything. When you say that, there might be a little bit of rioting, but it's a sad state of American commentary when we get to the point where, that we even think that it's even a possibility or a likelihood of rioting. I'll never forget 2008 when I was in law school in North Carolina, which ended up being a swing state, which ended up essentially giving a very strong tell early that President Obama was going to win. It wasn't even so much that I was even initially in love with the idea of President Obama versus John McCain. I mean, candidly, in actually developing an understanding of Barack Obama and some of the policies and things he had, I really became to enjoy him. Not only that, but also the message that he shared of hope and prosperity and not being the blue states and the red states, but the United States. Whether people agree or disagree with that, it's fine. They're entitled to their own opinion. But it wasn't a concern of if Barack won or McCain won, if anybody was going to run out to the streets and break windows. It was, for me, I remember President Obama won, and I remember sitting in the room with, I still remember to this day, sitting in the room with my roommate, at the time he was a soccer player at UNC, a bit younger than me. I'm in law school and things touch a little bit different. And at the outset of the campaign, I will say candidly, because I was at the University of North Carolina Law School, prior to anyone really realizing who Barack Obama was, I was actually a supporter of John Edwards before a lot of the things that happened with him, because he was one of the attorneys who oversaw the Center for Poverty and Civil Rights at the University of North Carolina Law School. He and Elizabeth were very much involved in that. And so a lot of people he had to support a lot of people at Carolina Law School at the early stages of the primaries. And then obviously brought in candidates, so on and so forth. And that was the summer before. But anyway, I remember watching that election, reflecting and crying a little bit, just like seeing tears come in my eyes. And I didn't plan it. I didn't put my hand down or anything like that. And then everyone, lots of people, ran to the center of Franklin Street, and it was like UNC had just won the national championship. And it wasn't even necessarily though because because I don't think like a lot of people that were out there celebrating didn't necessarily vote for Barack, or maybe they did. I mean, I did. I had a shirt on and everything, but it was just a feeling of success that was not of I beat the opponent. Because as much as I wanted to see Barack win, I didn't dislike John McCain.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people dislike John McCain. John McCain is a respectful, honorable, God bless his soul. He was a steward. He was empathetic. He was sympathetic. He was a good human being who just happened to disagree with. And when he had rallies and people would say things that were disgusting about his opponent, and people would try to, make claims that were clearly not true, John McCain would say, no, that's not what we're going to do. There was a level of discourse that even though it was very, strong disagreement, was civil. It was civil. And we use the term now so loosely, civil unrest. And, I hope that after this election, like you said, no matter who wins, I hope we have some rest. And, I hope we drown the voices of the cries that are not positive. I hope we can accept winning as much as we can accept defeat. And, I'm just so thankful to have the opportunity to get on here with you, Keenan, and be a part of what I guess is going to be a historic night in America. So I guess we'll see if you're right.
Yeah, man, we'll see. And to all of our viewers, appreciate y'all tuning in. And to all of our listeners on the podcast, appreciate y'all. I know we're a little bit behind on we didn't release this past Sunday. But Che, I've been working behind the scenes. Just a little bit of a lighter note. I've been working behind the scenes, and I think I got a nice lineup of guests. One is a pastor who works in financial services and wealth planning, which I think I have some interesting questions for him. Can't wait for us to schedule that. I've been talking to DK Metcalf, man. The dude is balling. I'm trying to get him on. He said he would come. He said he would come on, but he's a busy man. You making plays like that in the NFL week in, week out. You got busy. You got a busy schedule, especially on your off days. And we still two-pronged attack on getting Mookie on the podcast. So I think with these next few guests, man, our viewers are gonna be blessed. Gonna be some game drops, some gems drop for sure. Keep rocking with us, keep tuning in, and we'll keep doing our best to give you, our opinions and give you some real talk.
Appreciate it, man. I'm so excited to keep it going.
Yes, sir.
Well, I guess we sign out. We'll wake up tomorrow, Keenan, and I'm gonna go ahead and say I think I agree with you, and I don't think it's gonna be a landslide, but I think Joe Biden's gonna run away with it here tonight. So great talk and enjoyed it, and thanks listeners for listening in.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all.